They didn't need to slam doors or raise their voice. Their silence was a sculptor shaping me piece by piece. A single look, not even cruel, just vacant, would freeze the breath in my lungs. That was their language. Not words. Absences. At first, it felt like attentiveness. They just needed space. They preferred quiet. I adjusted. I shrank. The room would go cold when they were displeased. I could feel it before I understood it, the way you sense a storm before the clouds break. There was no outburst, just the vacuum of warmth. Their disapproval arrived like winter, not sudden but undeniable. They never said, "You can't do that." Instead, they'd smile faintly, then vanish. No good night. No goodbye. Just enough withdrawal to make my stomach twist with guilt, even though I couldn't name what I'd done. And so I learned to anticipate, to rehearse conversations in my head, to change the way I laughed, the way I moved, the way I felt, all in hopes of keeping the room warm. There was one evening, small, forgettable on the surface, when I stood in the doorway, hand on the light switch, and hesitated. I wasn't sure if turning it off would annoy them. Would they think I was rushing them? Being cold? My body froze mid-motion as if my autonomy had to pass through an invisible sensor first. And that's when it hit me. I no longer acted. I calculated. The leash wasn't on my wrist, it was inside me. A quiet tug behind every choice. Not love, not even fear, but a conditioned hope that maybe this time I'd do it right enough to keep the warmth. But warmth with them was currency, and I never had enough in the bank. Their control wasn't a cage. It was a fog that rolled in slowly, until I couldn't see where I ended and their mood began. And that's how they kept me. Not by chains, but by training me to chain myself. They didn't need to slam doors or raise their voice. Their silence was a sculptor shaping me piece by piece. A single look, not even cruel, just vacant, would freeze the breath in my lungs. That was their language. Not words. Absences. At first, it felt like attentiveness. They just needed space. They preferred quiet. I adjusted. I shrank. The room would go cold when they were displeased. I could feel it before I understood it, the way you sense a storm before the clouds break. There was no outburst, just the vacuum of warmth. Their disapproval arrived like winter, not sudden but undeniable. They never said, "You can't do that." Instead, they'd smile faintly, then vanish. No good night. No goodbye. Just enough withdrawal to make my stomach twist with guilt, even though I couldn't name what I'd done. And so I learned to anticipate, to rehearse conversations in my head, to change the way I laughed, the way I moved, the way I felt, all in hopes of keeping the room warm. There was one evening, small, forgettable on the surface, when I stood in the doorway, hand on the light switch, and hesitated. I wasn't sure if turning it off would annoy them. Would they think I was rushing them? Being cold? My body froze mid-motion as if my autonomy had to pass through an invisible sensor first. And that's when it hit me. I no longer acted. I calculated. The leash wasn't on my wrist, it was inside me. A quiet tug behind every choice. Not love, not even fear, but a conditioned hope that maybe this time I'd do it right enough to keep the warmth. But warmth with them was currency, and I never had enough in the bank. Their control wasn't a cage. It was a fog that rolled in slowly, until I couldn't see where I ended and their mood began. And that's how they kept me. Not by chains, but by training me to chain myself. "Wow, you've changed," they said. But I hadn't changed. I had vanished. Layer by layer, not overnight, but gradually. I had become what they could tolerate, what wouldn't provoke silence, what wouldn't threaten their fragile ego. I stopped wearing red. It drew too many eyes. Too much attention. I stopped finishing songs I loved. They'd always switch the station or roll their eyes. Eventually, I stopped pressing play at all. I stopped dreaming out loud. Stopped speaking in absolutes. Stopped dancing in the kitchen. Stopped being and started performing. At the time, I thought it was growth, compromise, maturity. But now I see it for what it was. Self-erasure masquerading as peace. Still, beneath the masks and the monotone, there was someone real. Someone who laughed too loud, wore bold lipstick, and had dreams that didn't require permission. Someone I abandoned to survive. But she never left. She waited, And one day, not dramatic, not loud, a crack opened. Maybe it was the way sunlight hit my face through the window. Maybe it was the stranger who called me by my name with warmth. Maybe it was the moment I said no and didn't explain it. Something shifted. I heard myself humming in the car. Not for them. For me. I bought a shirt I knew they'd hate and wore it anyway. I stood up straighter, took up more space. Every step forward felt like brushing dust off something ancient and sacred, like an archaeologist kneeling at the dig site of her own soul. Each rediscovery wasn't new, it was familiar. This was the girl who used to write poetry, who used to cry at sunsets, who used to believe she didn't have to earn love. And the more I uncovered, the more they panicked, because I was no longer a mirror. I was no longer a blank page for their projections. I was becoming someone they couldn't mold, someone they couldn't mute. I wasn't lost. I was buried. And now, I was returning. Their control always looked like certainty, poised, icy, commanding. But now I see it for what it was, panic in disguise. They didn't shout because they were powerful. They stayed calm because they were fragile, terrified that one raised voice might shatter the illusion they'd built around us both. They needed the script to go exactly as written. And I was the lead actress, expected to play my part, hit my marks, and never improvise. But I did. The first time I disagreed calmly, not to provoke but to speak truth. They blinked, just once, like a flicker in their wiring. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply said, "That's not true." And for a moment, the stage lights dimmed, the scenery cracked. Their anger wasn't thunder. It was the sound of scaffolding collapsing. Because if I wasn't wrong, if I wasn't broken, if I wasn't the problem, then who were they? They feared that silence between us. Because in that silence I was thinking. I was remembering. And nothing terrifies a narcissist more than a mind they can no longer mold. So they tried again. "You're amazing. I don't know why you think you're not. I just care so much. That's why I get upset. I'm the only one who truly understands you." Compliments laced with rope, pity dressed as devotion, guilt disguised as love. But this time I wasn't starving. Their praise didn't taste like sustenance, tasted like a trick. I didn't flinch. I didn't thank them. I just watched, and I saw the fear beneath it all. The way their eyes darted when I stood still. The way they talked faster when I grew quiet. Because when I stopped performing, the whole play began to unravel. They weren't the director. They were the puppeteer. And the strings were slipping. My calm truth tangled their choreography. My refusal to react knocked over their set. They reached for me, not out of love, but to tighten the strings. But I wasn't theirs to control anymore. They needed me needy. They needed me blind. They needed me small. And I wasn't, because I had learned to sit in hunger and not crawl back for crumbs. Their grip wasn't power. It was desperation. And I could finally see it. The phone buzzed. Once, then again. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the screen. The name that used to send lightning through my spine now felt like static. I knew what was inside. Accusations. Half-truths shaped to wound. Memories twisted like wire, sharp at the ends. And just beneath it all, the bait, the hook wrapped in nostalgia. I felt it, that old reflex rising, the urge to explain, to clarify, to prove that I wasn't what they said I was. To send paragraphs, to outline timelines, to reopen wounds just to show where they had cut. I even typed the first sentence, then paused. My thumb hovered. The blue cursor blinked at me, waiting. But I was no longer waiting on them, because something had shifted. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet. Still. I hit backspace. All of it gone. And I put the phone down. I sat in the quiet. Not the suffocating kind they once used to punish me. Not the icy silence meant to control. But my silence. A boundary wrapped in calm. A door closed without a slam. And on the other side, peace. I remembered how many nights I had wasted. Writing speeches they'd never hear. Explaining myself to someone who was never listening, only gathering ammunition. Every sentence I gave them was a thread in the noose. But now I held the scissors. And with one soft refusal, I cut the pattern loose. They could accuse. They could rewrite the script. They could perform their drama without me. Because silence wasn't my punishment anymore. It was my power. I didn't need to correct the story. Because the truth didn't need a stage. It just needed space. And I had finally made some. Behind the closed door, I heard it echo. Not their voice. Mine. They always needed an audience. But I was more than that. I was their mirror. Their echo chamber. Their favorite prop. When I stepped off stage, they didn't just lose attention. They lost their identity. At first, they smiled wider. Posted more. Laughed louder in conversations. Dropping my name into stories like confetti. Trying to reclaim the spotlight. They rewrote history with poetic flair. She just couldn't handle real love. I tried everything. She changed. But the timing was off. The lines too rehearsed. The emotion didn't land. Mutual friends, the ones they had always effortlessly charmed, started to blink twice. To pause. There was a joke at dinner that no one laughed at. A teary-eyed story that felt oddly rehearsed. They were still performing. But the stage lights weren't as forgiving anymore. Because now, there was no empath to mirror the sadness. To validate the story. To nod and smile and soothe their ego. Without me, the performance became a monologue. And even that was cracking. They tried new props. Sympathy from friends. Romantic replacements. Online tributes to self-growth. But the energy was frantic. The charm had edges. Their desperation began to show. Because admiration was the fuel. And I had walked away with the gas can. They weren't built for abandonment. Only for applause. And now, under the weight of their own spotlight, the stage began to groan. It started subtly. A twitch in the smile. A pause too long. A compliment that sounded like a plea. People noticed. Not all at once, but in ripples. A shared glance. A quiet something feels off. Because without a scapegoat, their stories lost shape. Without a contrast, their sainthood felt suspicious. And suddenly, they weren't the misunderstood hero. They were the storm. The mask they wore, crafted so delicately for admiration, was never designed for scrutiny. And it cracked. They blamed the lighting. They blamed me. But the truth was simpler. I had stopped playing the part. And without a character to control, the play collapsed. They unraveled. Because I was no longer theirs to manage. No longer in orbit. No longer clapping from the audience. I had left the theater. And the lights dimmed with me. They always feared being seen, truly seen. So they made sure to speak first. Louder. With more color. And just enough distortion to sound believable. She changed. I gave them everything. They just walked away. The words weren't spoken to me. They were scattered like seeds on timelines. In group chats. Across mutual friends' tables. Subtle. Strategic. Desperate. They became fluent in vague posts. Quotes about betrayal. Cryptic captions. Photos paired with hollow wisdom. It wasn't a smear campaign. It was a performance. With a single goal. To be the one people comforted. They needed to be wounded. Because the spotlight on their cruelty had dimmed. And only pain could get it back. So they put on the costume of the brokenhearted. Spoke of healing while hunting attention. Told their version of the story. But kept editing it. As if truth were a flexible thing. And I watched. Not because I wanted revenge. But because silence had become my sanctuary. There were days I wanted to speak. To correct the lies. To show screenshots and timelines. To map the years of manipulation. But I didn't. Because truth doesn't perform. It waits. It waits while the lies twist tighter. While the stories grow heavier. while the web they spin begins to collapse under its own weight. And I watched that too. Friends who once nodded with sympathy began to hesitate, to question the version they were fed. That doesn't sound like her. Didn't they say something different last time? Whispers, then doubt, then distance. Because when someone keeps changing the story, people stop listening. Their wildfire of lies burned bright, but it consumed everything, even their credibility. And when the smoke cleared, there I was, still, whole, unmoved. I didn't have to expose them. They did it themselves, one contradiction at a time. Because truth doesn't need a microphone. It just needs time. And when the noise fades, it's the only voice left echoing. I woke up to light, not panic. No racing thoughts. No checking my phone for landmines disguised as messages. Just breath. Slow. Full. Mine. I padded to the kitchen barefoot. No need to be quiet. No need to perform. The kettle sang gently. I poured the tea. Watched the steam rise and curl like incense around my thoughts. It was just a Tuesday. No big milestone. No breakthrough. But I felt present, and that was enough. I sat by the window, a book in my lap. The sun slipped through the glass, catching dust motes Madeira, like glitter in stillness. And I smiled, not because anything extraordinary happened, but because nothing did. No tension, no second-guessing, no eggshells underfoot. This wasn't the quiet I used to know, the quiet I'd endure, bracing for the storm. This was real peace, not the kind you fake to avoid conflict, the kind that roots itself deep. After you've pulled out every lie by hand, I used to mistake chaos for passion, used to think anxiety was just part of love, used to believe that peace meant boredom, because I'd never actually met it. But now, peace tastes like warm tea, like sleeping through the night, like walking without narrating every step in fear of misstep. This wasn't a victory lap. There was no trophy, no crowd clapping, just me, unapologetically breathing in my own life. It didn't feel like a win. It felt like a return to who I was, before the scripts, before the masks, before I made myself smaller just to be held. And she, the woman who used to dream in full color, was still here, not broken, not bitter, just softer, wiser, whole. She had waited patiently beneath the rubble. And now, like roots breaking through cracked pavement, she was growing again, not to prove anything, not to impress anyone, just to be. And that was the most powerful thing of all. They still avoid mirrors. They say the lighting's bad, say the glass is dirty, but really they're afraid of what they might see. Because I was the last real reflection they had. The last person who saw them not as a character, but as a fractured soul trying to wear perfection like a mask. And I held up the truth gently, painfully, like a mirror too honest to flatter. They flinched, then blamed the frame. Now, alone in their curated life, they reach for new supply, new attention, new faces, new flattery. But it all falls flat, because a puppet can't replace a mirror, and a script can't substitute for depth. They speak, but the laughter doesn't echo. They charm, but it doesn't land. Because deep down now, they remember. They remember the stillness in my gaze. The way I didn't flinch when they tried to distort the truth. The way I saw them fully and didn't look away. And now every silence in their new relationships feels different. Not peaceful, hollow. Not calm, vacant. They thought they missed me. But what they really missed was the version of themselves they could only find in my reflection. They try to tell the same stories, make the same gestures, but something's off. Even they can feel it. Because when you've seen your cracks in a real mirror, you can't go back to polished glass. There's a moment, standing in a bathroom lit too brightly, face bare, eyes tired, where they catch their own reflection. And for a flicker of a second, they see what I saw. Not a monster, not a villain, but a hollow hunger, wrapped in ego and fear. And that flicker burns. It echoes louder than any goodbye I ever whispered, louder than any boundary I ever built. And I don't need to say a word, because the truth stays. It haunts. It hums. And the mirror they smashed? It was never me. It was themselves. Now the shards are scattered. And every time they step forward, they bleed. I feel it from afar. Not with satisfaction, but with distance. Because I don't want revenge. I want peace. And they want a new mirror. But all they find are shadows. There was no goodbye. No dramatic monologue. No tears on the floor or fists on the door. Just me, standing at the edge of a life I no longer belonged to. The message sat unsent. I had written it 3 times, each version softer than the last. Each one trying to explain my absence to someone who had never truly heard my presence. And then I deleted it because I finally understood. Closure isn't something they give you. It's something you claim, quietly, firmly, with love. I scrolled to their name, paused, then pressed delete contact. Not out of bitterness, out of mercy for both of us. I took the old letter from the drawer, the one I had written during one of those lonely nights when I thought love meant endurance. I read it one last time, then fed it to the flame, curled, folded in on itself, and vanished. And I didn't flinch, because this wasn't rebellion. It was release. No more proving. No more hoping they'd understand. No more bending my truth to fit their comfort. I walked away, not from them, but from the version of myself that believed love had to be earned through pain. Leaving wasn't a grand escape. It was like stepping out of a house that was never mine to begin with. A house with beautiful furniture, but no warmth, locked rooms, cold floors, and windows that only looked inward. I closed the door gently, didn't slam it, didn't even lock it, because I knew I wouldn't be coming back. And that was the victory. Not that I hurt them, not that I won, but that I chose peace over potential, self-respect over rewriting endings, freedom over familiarity. I didn't look back, because this time I loved myself enough to walk forward with both hands free. And in that still, sacred moment, I felt it rise inside me, not triumph, not vengeance, but love. Real, quiet, unshakable love for the woman I became when I finally stopped waiting to be saved.